Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever you may be joining us from. We're really glad to see your faces and that you can join us for this Women's Earth Alliance event, Black Leadership, Equity, and the Future of the Environmental Movement. My name is Kiya Leake, and I'm the North America and Pacific Program Manager at Women's Earth Alliance, and I am very honored to be sharing space with such inspiring women doing work to create space and space for the voices and solutions that we need the most. And so finally, while we're gathering here virtually today, and while we have a global team located around the world, we as home base is located in what is currently known as Berkeley, California, in San Francisco Bay Area, but what is also known as Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Coginio-speaking Ohlone people. And I want to thank our Ohlone relatives for allowing us to call this place home. WIA recognizes that we are on stolen land, and we as an organization and community members have a responsibility to do all we can to be good guests of this land. And while land acknowledgements are an important first step, they must always be followed up with action. And Huichin, we take action by naming the ongoing and normalized colonization of indigenous lands, by speaking the original name of this land, by being in community with local Ohlone leaders like Karina Gold, the chair and spokesperson for the Confederate Villages of Lejeune, and a member of our original US Accelerator design team, and also through our Shumi Land Tax, which supports our colleagues at Segura Land Trust as they do the important work of rematriating their lands. We do this because we collectively, as an alliance, envision a future that is not only thriving and sustainable, but just. And in the chat, we will include information on where and how you can pay Shumi if you're in our area, and invite you to consider ways to join us in Shumi today. So, with that, for those of you who are new to our community, welcome again. I would love to share a little bit about who we are and what brings us here today. Women's Earth Alliance is a nearly 20-year global initiative that empowers women's leadership to protect the Earth, address the climate crisis, and ensure a just and thriving world. Since 2006, we have worked at the intersection of women's rights and the environment, creating programming, serving grassroots leaders around key environmental themes of climate change, from water to agriculture to land protection and energy. In partnership with both national and global organizations and networks, we co-design capacity building trainings where women leaders access technology, financing, mentorship, and a global alliance. And so WIA recognizes that women leading environmental initiatives are underserved in every way. Therefore, our key strategy to leveraging power of that global alliance is to mobilize resources and utilize collective action and collaborate to alleviate the burdens and barriers placed on grassroots women environmental leaders, especially now. Today, we will be hearing from three leaders who truly embody our central theory of change here at WIA, which is when women thrive, the earth thrives. And so, without further ado, we are so honored and fortunate to be joined by Wawa Gatheru, Gen Z climate activist, Rhodes Scholar, and founder and executive director of Black Girl Environmentalist, a national organization addressing the pipeline and pathway issues for Black girls, women, and gender expansive individuals in the climate. We're also joined by Tashanda Giles-Jones, a WIA leader who has recently co-designed a program with both WIA and Seeds of Carver LA called Black Girls Green Futures that's designed to catalyze the leadership and transformative power of young Black girls in South LA. And lastly, but not least, we are also joined by Jada Alexander here, founder of Daybreak Beach Club, a community-driven organization reconnecting Black and historically excluded communities to the ocean. She's also a mentor in our Black Girls Green Futures, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. And so I'm gonna pass it on to Jada first to introduce herself and kind of set the tone a bit for this conversation in the space that we're hoping to create as she shares how she's entering the space today. So, off to you, Jada.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Jada. I'm the founder and executive director of Daybreak Beach Club, which is an organization that is increasing emotional regulation for people through ocean-based activities such as surfing, and then from there, simulating environmental stewardship. And we just hit 1 year, and I'm so grateful to be here with this group of amazing, established, wonderful women that are making change. And just to set the tone for the conversation that we're going to have today, I wanted to talk a little bit about radical honesty, which is something that I have been highly impacted by from reading Marie Brown's book called Emergent Strategy. And so she talks about radical honesty as telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, but doing it with care, intention, and respect. I think that it means being real about what you feel, need, or notice instead of holding it in or pretending everything's fine. And so in conversations that I've had, I noticed that the easiest way for me to practice radical honesty is through preventing telling little white lies. Just, when somebody asks you like, "Hey, how are you doing?" You're like, "Everything's great." Just really being honest about where you're coming from because I believe that it allows us to connect very deep with one another. And so today I'm gonna say a sentence or two about where I'm coming from. This week has been the first week that Daybreak has been one, and so we've been doing a lot of kind of planning out what the next year is going to look like, reflecting on the last year. And it definitely has been a little bit difficult and overwhelming. And so I've been really trusting in friends and family and kind of looking for mentorship from people that have taken this path prior to me. And I think that this conversation is going to provide that just as much for me, as anybody else.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that note. I feel like we do get so used to holding so many things in, especially as Black men in this space. And um, it's so important to create space to continue to build trust in our personal spaces and as a community. And so thank you for that. I'm hoping we are able to carry that spirit through this conversation, that picture of radical honesty. Next, I'd love to pass it on to Wawa for a quick intro for herself, if there's anything, and how you're entering this space with us.
Hi everyone. My name. Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. I thought it meant that I was on mute. Hi everyone. My name is Wawa Gatheru. I am calling in from Brooklyn, New York, also known as Lenape Land, and I'm actually staying with some friends. So I'm coming into this space feeling cared for and in a really good mood. I've just been really content the last couple days, even though there's been a lot of the unknown that has been playing a huge role in how I'm approaching every single day. But in the midst of all of that, I've had family and friends really step up in really incredible ways. Who I am, why I'm here. As was shared earlier, I am the proud founder and executive director of Black Girl Environmentalist. We are an organization that our mission is to address the pathway and retention issue that exists in the climate sector, particularly for Black women and Black gender expansive folks. I can talk a little bit more about that journey and how the organization came to be later on. But essentially, we are an organization that follows the North Star of the economic framework that is Black women's best, which, funny enough, originated from Jada Jones when she was the chief economist at the Department of Labor, though I'm sure the Department of Labor has scrubbed this terminology from their website, or will in the near future. Black Women's Best is a framework that asserts that when we bring Black women from the economic margins out of economic precarity into economic prosperity, not only do we benefit and prosper, the rest of society prospers and benefits. And that concept is one that has shown itself in my own life as someone who is the descendant of incredible Black women, but then also just in so much of the joy that I have in my life is due to Black women in my life. And I find that that guiding path and North Star has been a really beautiful one to be in the midst of organizationally and then also personally. Outside of that, I'm a Scorpio. I'm astrologically inclined as well. So my Saturn return is a month away. So check in to see how I'm doing then. But I'm just really excited to be here and in the presence of just incredible Black girl environmentalists who are doing the work to cultivate ecosystems of care and who, even in the midst of all this political instability and pushback, are doubling down and refusing to back down. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes. And calling that in all the prosperity is the word weaving into today: economic prosperity, climate prosperity, justice prosperity, all those things. We're so happy to have you all. And now I'll also pass it to Tashanda to do a little intro with herself and how she's coming to the space.
Yes, hi everyone. My goodness, to follow these brilliant women is such a privilege. Again, my name is Tashanda Giles-Jones, and I am joining you from Los Angeles, California. I consider myself an environmental educator. I currently work in Los Angeles in primary and secondary schools, specifically with a charter school named Environmental Charter School, where I lead our environmental curriculum, instruction, and programming. That work, I have to say, is a dream manifested in my world, where I started my first 18 years of adulthood in medicine, and always found, although that space was very comfortable for me, I loved working in medicine. I loved nursing. I loved people. It was still a space that my Blackness and me being a woman was consistently challenged, and not always in overt ways, but in ways that I felt like I always not only had to stand up for myself, but for younger Black girls who were coming behind me. And I have this innate surge to pass information because I know that I am only who I am and what I know because of those who shared information with me. And so I come today to this panel with such an abundance of gratitude for the community that I am part of, that continues to grow because it didn't look like this when I first entered this space. And that nothing makes me prouder to be a Black woman than to see young Black women and girls follow their journey and feel open and motivated and inspired to challenge the everyday world, knowing that right now, the way our societies are set up are to continue to oppress not just our livelihoods, but our mental, our emotional, in order to determine a box for us. And so, as a co-designer and founder of Black Girls Green Futures, it was really important for me to bring all of the knowing and understanding I've collected over my life, in addition to what I continue to learn from others, to the young Black girls that I get to touch every single day. And the world we're faced with right now, especially our governmental world, our politics, and the work that I do, I feel like I am being attacked constantly in the world of education, in the world of equity. And it can feel powerless. And I am running away from a feeling of apathy in this work, in the way that what I'm running towards is this collective community that is localizing and coming together to not only educate, but share awareness that then turns into action. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all today. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And I think it's so crucial. It's like just by coming into this world and existing, you're challenging this everyday world that we're in, let alone taking in the power and having your eyes open to like what we actually need and what we want to bring and what we want to bring to spaces, how we want to heal spaces, how we want to heal the earth. Um, and so, yes, such a testament. Thank you, Tashanda, for sharing that. Great part. Thank you about that. And thank you for the incredible mini overview of the work that's leading. I'd love to start off and go a little deeper um, with you, Wawa. And can you tell us a little bit about Black Girl Environmentalists and the specific pathway issues that the organization seeks to address through your programming and what that path has been like for you personally?
Yeah, of course. Also, I want to give a shout out to, I see a Jetty has joined the call. Jetty from Kenya. My other name is Jetty. I could get into how that is. It's just like Kikuyu tradition, naming traditions, like kind of interesting. But I would have been named Jetty if my grandmother had passed before I was born, but she was still around. So Wojcik was my name, but technically my name's Jetty too. So hi, Jetty. So about Black Girl Environmentalist. So Black Girl Environmentalist and the idea for the organization was really seeded throughout my time navigating the climate sector. I had an experience when I was 15, or multiple experiences at the same time, where I, like many other children of immigrants, grew up with feeling or being told that there were three career options for me: being a doctor, being a lawyer, or being an engineer. And all my family are nurses. And so for me, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a doctor. And so I got to high school and I took a chemistry class and I got a D, which did not bode well for myself. And I realized that probably going to college and majoring in whatever major that I'd have to take pre-med classes, that I likely would not do well enough to get into med school. Maybe that wasn't my path, and maybe there was another opportunity for me to get involved in change maker work. I had one more semester requirement for a science class, and it was either a second semester of chemistry or environmental science. And I took environmental science, and I had a really incredible experience, a really incredible educator who did a really good job at connecting the dots between environmental issues, not being out there, but being intimately involved with how we live our lives, how we conceptualize health, how we conceptualize the future, and really helped bring into perspective the ways that climate change not only creates new problems, but intensifies all existing social ills. And so that was around the first time that I began to, in my own life reflections, that of my families, that I began to understand that, climate change isn't impacting us all equally, and that people of color, in particular, Black people across the diaspora, are being impacted by climate change first and worse. I remember being very frustrated because it felt like it took until I was 15 years old to really begin to grapple with the severity of the issue, but it felt like climate was just missing from general narratives. So at that age, I was like, I'm going to dedicate my life to environmental justice. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but I'm going to throw myself into it. And I did. And so I spent basically the first like 6, 7 years of my time starting out as a youth climate organizer in Connecticut, where I'm from. I went to the University of Connecticut. I studied environmental science. I got really involved with organizing on campus, outside of campus, and regardless of where I was, whether it was the classroom, whether it was organizing spaces, whether it was internships turned jobs, I would be the only woman of color, definitely the only Black person, and usually the youngest person by at least 15 years minimum. And that was quite frustrating to me because one of the first things that people would ask me is, oh, it's interesting that you're interested in this work. And I'd always answer back, well, why is that? Why wouldn't I care about the issues that are impacting us all, but disproportionately impacting my community? And so I guess there was a lot of frustration that was built up as I was getting my own education by using, the internet, getting books at the library, learning about the long legacy of environmental justice as, a movement in the United States externally, learning about the long tradition of Black and Brown women as Earth stewards, learning more about my own family's background, and just feeling like there was a huge gap in the narrative in what I was learning from school, and then also in what I was being presented to as possible green futures as a practitioner in the space. And so I ended up winning the Rhodes Scholarship and going to Oxford. And when I was there, my dissertation was on Black women environmentalists. I did a dissertation that was a narrative inquiry, talking to dozens of Black women across the climate disciplines who are mid to senior level to better understand what were the barriers that they had experienced. Many of the barriers that I was experiencing and am experiencing as an early career individual, but what were the barriers that they were experiencing? And then what were the infrastructures of care and support that help support them in their journeys to continue to stay in that space? And so, in being enthralled in that process for 2 years, I decided to, for me, I was like, okay, if I want to be a scholar activist, then I'm not just going to write this dissertation and publish this work and then walk away from it. This is an opportunity for me to use this information that I've compiled and this understanding that I've received from all these incredible women and to essentially create an organization. At that time, Black Girl Environmentalist was an Instagram page that was more of a networking virtual affinity group. And I thought there'd be an opportunity to really address a lot of these issues early on by hopefully creating some infrastructures. And so it was that foundation that started Black Girl Environmentalist as a nonprofit. And now we have a really incredible team. We have 3 full-time staff. We have part-time staff who are hub leads, and we run 5 national programs. Our 2 largest programs are a Hazel and Johnson Fellowship Program, which is a climate internship pipeline program in which we place early careers, so current college students and recent graduates at different climate or environmental internships for 10 weeks over the summer. We make sure that they're paid equitably. They receive at least $18 an hour. They receive a $5,000 living wage stipend, a mentor, weekly professional development support, and an end of summer in-person retreat in nature. And that's been a really cool way for us to support folks in getting their foot in the door and making sure that they receive a lot of the support that a lot of the women that, again, I had talked to had said it either been really crucial at the beginning or that they felt like they would have really needed at that time. Our hub program is in 14 different cities. So those are opportunities for members of our organization to take on leadership roles in their cities, and they cultivate different community-led and focused events that bring folks together to really build a climate community. And so that's been a really cool way for us to really show other Black girl environmentalists that we're here. We've been doing this work, and there is community to be built around these shared experiences and values. And so that's a bit about the work that we do. It's been an interesting year, as you can imagine, as all of us are experiencing in, especially being an organization called Black Girl Environmentalist, that is not one that will ever back away from our mission and our intention around who we serve. And that has come with consequences. But yeah, running Philly Hub right here does come with some consequences. But at the same time, I think the moments like this are important for us, again, to double down and to lean into courage and to lean into, maintaining the reasons why we got into this work in the first place.
Yes. That's such it's such an important, I mean, like you can imagine us too here at Women's Earth Alliance. It's like we are women. we're Black, we're this. It's our identity. And leaning into courage, leaning into bravery. Such a word. And I feel like at this point we can probably start a club of those who started off about to go to med school or law school. Listening to you, and I was like, oh, this sounds really familiar. Oh, as somebody who also wanted to go to med school pretty much my entire life until I saw the light. No shade to any doctors in the room. You guys are wonderful, doing the great work. But we're definitely starting a club. And also to highlight what you were saying about like that importance of conceptualizing the future. And it's like that's what you guys are doing. That's what is being done in so much of the work that we're doing, giving the tools in order to understand and conceptualize the future, so that we can envision the change, because you can't envision it, you can't move anywhere. And so, so beautiful. Thank you for giving us an overview and celebrating that growth. You don't always expect the growth, but you've pivoted well. You guys have been moving through it well. Our next question, I'd like to move towards Tashanda, who I have the pleasure of working with very closely with some WIA programming. Like we mentioned earlier, this year WIA launched our new program in Los Angeles called Black Girls Green Future in partnership with environmental charter schools and Seeds of Carver, Los Angeles. I'm also originally from LA as well, so program's very close to my heart. Tashanda, can you tell us a little bit why you saw the need for this program and what transformations you've been seeing so far since we launched this year?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I agree, Wawa. I could just be like copy paste. I don't know if it's something about first generation, Americans. There is something around Black women and being in spaces of taking care of others, right? And I consider education one of those spaces too. It's where you will find us in those spaces, and medicine definitely tends to be a space where we're attracted to. I too was going to be a doctor at one point, and I feel like I get to bring that into the work that I do now in a more intentional way. And so, building off of what Wawa was talking about and started, instead of explaining like kind of how I got to where I am, I really want to discuss the importance of where I am and why the other women on this call are a shining example as to why Black Girls Green Futures also exists alongside Black Girl Environmentalists, and thankfully lots of other growing organizations that are in the same vein, right? So for me, I've been working with this charter school system for a little over 11 years, but doing this work in Los Angeles for a little over 16 years, and always being really connected to the youth, not always specifically in communities that have historically been oppressed. I've had the ability to work in communities that have historically been privileged. And there are a lot of obvious differences. However, teaching kids, you can compare across the board. Kids are kids, right? But the thing that Wawa said that is extremely important is the accessibility. Kids will be kids, and kids are interested in what they're interested in, but accessibility shifts the narratives. And when you are dealing with populations like where my schools are, we were opened intentionally in areas that have historically been oppressed, marginalized, communities that are frontline communities. When we talk about impacts of climate change, they sit on the intersection of injustices around education, health, criminal justice, and media, entertainment, and the built environment. And when I look at the kids the kids and the family I get to access to every single day in my work, I am always looking for the population of the Black girls, because as we know, especially in WIA, when you support a girl, when you support a woman, you support a community. We know that women are the ones that birth our species. We know that they are normally the matriarchs of communities. They take on the workload, they take on the emotional load, they take on the mental load. And I'm generalizing, but we do, right? And so when I think in the work that I do and the absence of young Black girls in places where we're creating accessibility for lived experiences and exposures, I was feeling like I wasn't reaching them the way that I needed to. And I was constantly identifying in these spaces. I've been very data driven in the past 5 years or so. And I've been really driven to identify spaces where Black folks weren't showing up, Black folks in general, but definitely Black youth and Black girls. And for me, I found that they aren't showing up. And a constant response for me would be like, well, in the United States, African Americans, the Black population is only about 14% of the entire population. We're about, 341 approximately million in the United States, and we're only 14% of that. And in California, we are only 6% of the population of about 40 million. And so when you look at data and you look at who shows up to schools that are specifically created for this type of work, degrees in which people are going into to come out into green careers, you see the percentage of Black populations really low. And that wasn't good enough for me. That was, well, there's only a certain amount of you. For me, that meant that there was a really big importance to create accessibility for those populations so that they could show up more. And I also thought a lot about, if we're not showing up in these spaces, if we are not a Jada and we're not a Wawa and we're not interested and we didn't have a really good teacher and, we didn't have the internal motivation or the inspiration, then we're missing in those conversations. We're missing in the development of a greener future. We're missing in the potential high earning wages of future jobs. We're missing in these STEM careers where they can be funded for things and travel. And so that was really important for me to pay attention to. I get to create lots of programming in the position I'm in my schools, and I do a lot of work outside of my regular 9 to 5 in the world of environmental education and equity work. I get to work with an amazing organization in California, being from California, that focuses on this work, Cali. And I get to do equity work with them. And I've been able to learn a whole lot more and bringing that back down to my schools. So when I was talking to Kiya and Danny about what I wanted to see and what I wanted to do outside of what I was already doing, I had an experience since the pandemic with a group of teenage girls out of our high school. And it was an experience, our newest high school, and it was an experience I hadn't had in the past. I kind of vibe with the kids. I realize like I'm more middle school vibe than high school vibe. I get really silly, but I can go between the both. But I was finding that after coming back from the pandemic, one, we know that our babies were having a heightened amount of mental anguishes, right? But you put that on top of a community that has a baseline of trauma in their DNA. You can expect that there would be some unprecedented impacts for these groups of kids. And so I was always thinking about this invisible backpack that our babies were coming to school with, what kind of traumas, big or small. If you have to step over an unhoused person on your way to school, that is a trauma, right? Let alone having food insecurity or not being able to have your utilities on, not being able to get to places, all of the things that come with living in the communities that we serve in some fashion. And talking to these young ladies, I was realizing they weren't meeting me in the eye, right? They weren't showing up for free, really cool, fun opportunities. They were really opposed to the outdoor environment that we were creating for them. And I feel like they just weren't being heard. And I feel like I wasn't speaking their language. And so I was really interested in creating a small collaborative group of like-minded Black women, very intentional in the Blackness that I wanted to create, because I felt like there was a missing cultural understanding of what I think Jada had mentioned earlier, this need for mentorship and this need to hear where girls were and what their issues were and what they were working through in order to bring them into this world of environmentalism, where they can have economic stability, where they could do work in their communities and make a difference. And so I was trying to think of all the different access points to do this work. And with partnership with WIA and Seeds of Carver being a science-minded space, we were able to design Black Girls Green Future.
Yes, and it's been such a such a roller coaster, but a good one, designing, and like it took vision for you to be able to like see those girls. And I think that's the vision that we need, more of in these spaces, a transition from like seeing who shows up to like changing the narrative of like how are we making space so that everyone can show up. And so, yes, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Um, Next, I'd love to pass it on to Jada, who, like I said before, is a mentor in Black Girls Green Future and also connected to Black Girls Environmentalist and also running her own nonprofit, sharing her wide gifts with all of us. And so, can you tell us a little bit about Daybreak Beach Club and what need you were seeing that inspired you to start your work, and how you're filling gap that you're seeing?
Yes. So my journey started when I was actually really young. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I grew up inland in California in a place named Hemet, which, if you've heard of it or if you've been there, you probably know that you would never visit again. But I experienced a lot of racial trauma growing up, which impacted like how I viewed myself. And my parents always taught my brother and I that we belonged outside. And so my family had the privilege of, during the 2008 recession, of going on a camping trip for a few months, kind of around the United States. And that was my first time really being fully immersed in the outdoors and creating that connection. And that is something that I really pulled myself back into in those times when I was facing a lot of difficulty in school or in my personal life. And so the outdoors in general were my safe space, but especially the ocean, because my family is from Oceanside. And so whenever we were going to come visit my grandmother or my uncle, we would always be visiting them at the beach. And so I learned how to swim at a very young age. And that really just became my lifeline as I continued through middle school and high school, continuing to go through these hardships that, like myself, many Black girls growing up don't really know how to handle. And so when it was time for me to figure out what I wanted to do for college, my parents had always told me to do what didn't feel like work. And so my first instinct was to do something related to the outdoors. And so I applied to UC Santa Barbara as an environmental studies major, and I got in. And from there, I tried a bunch of different things, one of them being marine science. And so I became a marine science researcher, and I did a lot of environmental education and marine science research with different communities and got to go to conferences and give talks. But like many other women in these fields, I did not feel supported. And then so I was back to the square of doing something that I loved, but not really feeling like I belonged, which just made it a lot harder to continue to do the work. And so I did it for 3 years, and then I hit my breaking point and I decided I couldn't do it anymore. And so I cut it off cold turkey, and I decided that I needed to kind of reconvene with myself. And I spent a few months thinking back to why I even went down that pathway in the first place. And I was reminded that the reason that I truly cared so much about the environment is because I had a deep emotional connection to it. And that emotional connection, I would not have continued. I wouldn't have made it to college without that connection. And there are so many people that have not had the opportunity or the resources or the feeling of safety to be able to try these different things, which I found so integral to my continuation of life, right? And so I I had been a surf coach for a few years and I worked with kids of color and I learned that, you can give kids wetsuits, you can give them surfboards, you can have safety personnel, but if the kids do not feel supported, feel supported emotionally, feeling safe physically, then no matter how much gear you give them access to, it's not going to matter because they're not going to feel comfortable in the space. They're not going to go do it on the weekends. They're not going to enjoy it. And so the creation of Daybreak Beach Club was really based upon providing people with the opportunity to make this emotional connection in a way that really emphasized emotional and physical well-being. And so a lot of what we concentrate on is holistic well-being. And so we use a lot of trauma-informed practices, and we work with the International Surf Therapy Organization. And so our goal is to kind of really help facilitate emotional connection for kids, for adults, for kids of color, and not. And from there to kind of let them create an intrinsic responsibility, and figuring out how they best want to contribute. And I feel like that just really comes naturally. When you feel supported by something, you naturally want to give back. And so, in our surf programs, we really focus on just having fun. We don't kind of like really force kids to listen to the jargon. But from there, we have been kind of implementing civic science education. So, giving kids the opportunity to participate in research with, like, for example, right now we're working with a PhD student from Scripps and giving kids the opportunity to really figure out, okay, what do I care about? What am I interested? How do I answer that question? And who can help me do it? And giving them all of the resources and the collaboration that they need in order to feel like they have the ability to make change. And so we really focus on the connection from emotions to science, and we're still very young, so it is something that I am continuing to figure out and learn from. But that is kind of like the story of how Daybreak was created.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. And I feel like I hear that. I feel like each of you have talked about like the importance of that why and like what it is to share that why, sharpen the why and come back to it and then figuring out how to share that with the masses of people that you're each and we're all working with. And in that vision of like mentorship being really crucial um, in developing and teaching, I think it's something that's kind of gotten missed in where we are now, especially as we continue to move forward and steward the earth well and figure out what exactly that looks like. And no one builds generational knowledge and wisdom alone. So creating spaces to build skills needed to face the climate crisis and even more train useful vision to imagine a life outside of our current system is really crucial. So in that, I guess this is a question for whoever feels pulled to answer. What have been some of your most effective practices in mentorship that have been implemented, and what does mentoring for a green career look like? Like, how can we expand our thinking on what a green job is? And yeah, if you had any thoughts, I spit.
I can share really quickly. A big part of Black Girls Green Futures is the mentorship part. And, we are just launching this program for the first time. So we're kind of considering it a pilot program, and how will it continue to grow, specifically for the locality in which it is serving. Um, and I want to be really intentional in that space, right? Like staying in that space and growing in that space. But I think what we have realized, what we kind of knew, but what is surfacing stronger each time we meet up with the girls and the mentors, is that as much as this program is for the girls, it's for the mentors. And it's also for what we call our wisdom keepers, our facilitators, because every time I get these souls together, there is this rebirth of inspiration that happens from all the individuals. And for me, I think that mentorship part, like when I came into this Second Life career, I needed that professor to push me out of the nest, because when I was younger and went into medicine, I was like the youngest. I had this cockiness of like, I know I'm good at this. And, was taking everything by storm, but then shifting as an older individual into a new career where, I didn't feel as confident. It took a professor of mine to kick me out of the nest and say, you've had enough classes. You don't need to learn anything more. You need to go out there and do it. And I think that's part of mentoring. I think where I am now, I'm constantly, or what I would say is that I know for a fact that my purpose on this planet was to work with youth, to work with kids. I know that I have an innate strength in that space. I know that I am open enough to understand that I continue to learn every single day, not just from those who are older from me, but from every single person, even those children I come in contact with. And so I like to create space and where there is that fluidity of exchanging of ideas. Kids keep you young, they keep you in the know, but they also keep you responsible for your wisdom. It is important as a mentor, once you know, that you educate others. It's our responsibilities as human beings to share what we know, that our time on this planet is spent to continue to learn and to share what we learn. And so I think that's a huge part of Black Girls Green Futures.
Yeah. Feeding that spirit, feeding that vision, and kind of co-designing in partnership, which is kind of the hardest part. Um, I guess I'll invite Wawa. Any thoughts on that? Especially because you're working with, slightly older girls, like almost like in that next stage, and women, uh, looking to vision what their space looks like, what their career looks like, and how that intersects with their identity. Yeah, what are some practices that you've seen be implemented and that you've implemented um, that have been really pivotal to your work?
Yeah, what's so interesting is a lot of when I was doing my dissertation, there wasn't a ton, even to this day, there's not a lot of literature that specifically focuses on Black women and our experience in the climate sector, in the environmental space, sustainability, et cetera. In fact, I would probably say there's probably like 5 comprehensive pieces of literature out there, which is insane. At least that's accessible out there. But what was because of that, I kept having to lean on other research of Black women in leadership at large, Black women in the workplace at large. And what was so, I would almost say a bit frustrating, is that the overwhelming response that I was getting from looking at that literature was that there was a saying that Black women in leadership overall, and like leadership, like most of the researchers on leadership, not even just us being in spaces, um, was saying that Black women are over mentored and underfunded. And I mean, I don't know the corporate space like that, so maybe that's the situation. But my experience, and from being in relationship and with other Black women in this space, running an organization like specifically for Black women in this space, I think it's a both and for us. Like Black women are under-mentored and underfunded. And that's certainly been my experience, my entire team's experience, and folks in our community's experience, so much so that, when we've created our programs, we've really taken the concept of participatory justice really seriously. So our Hazel M. Johnson Fellowship program, for example, is our largest program. It's our most costly program, and something that we wanted to do before creating all of the internal and external criteria and program dynamics was to host 3 town halls with our community to share the different ideas and different stages of the process that we were in, and to basically consult our community and go, hey, does this work for you? Like, what do you need? What isn't? Like, what do you think is going to be helpful for you? What do you think is not going to be helpful for you? And what was so funny is that not funny, but one of the first things that folks said in every single one of our town halls was, if you're going to have this program, make sure that each fellow has a mentor. Make sure that inside of that organization, there is a dedicated person who is supporting that fellow during the summer outside of their internship, requirements and job activities. Have someone that they can, if they're in person, go out to lunch with, or virtual, have someone that they're having set aside time to get to build that type of emotional relationship. And so that was something that we embedded in the program. Because people kept asking for mentorship, that's why we created a college mentorship program that was specifically around supporting majority HBC students and community college students, because we recognize that even though there is major discrepancies in Black women and Black gender expansive folks in getting into the space, period, there was a specific and is a specific lack of green opportunities at HBCUs and community colleges. And so that was another experience of our community introduced us to a need, and we decided to create programming around that. So I think that mentorship is really integral in this work. And I think because of the nature of this space, of there being such high rates of burnout, regardless of who you are, because we're trying to save the planet, we're trying to like reconnect with each other, with Mother Earth, etc. Mentorship is a really great opportunity for, as Tashanda was talking about earlier, great opportunity from people on both ends to learn. I think as you were sharing, like, I do think that young people and youth-led movements in particular do carry a certain energy about them. And I think that energy is infectious for the movement at large, and especially in mentorship relationships where there is that, that infectious energy that I think is helpful on both ends. And then also in regards to mentorship from someone who might be more experienced or might be older, there's also all these aspects of wisdom around how do you navigate a space that sometimes struggles to love us back. And how do you continue to persevere in a space without becoming a martyr? Like, there are all these different things that I think are very unique to Black women mentoring other Black women. And I think it's really beautiful, and we do need more of it, and we do need more resources to facilitate opportunities for folks to get connected and folks to build that type of relationship, because I do think it's paramount to us addressing, retention issues in our movement.
Yes, yes. And I feel like that intergenerational aspect as well is so important. I see you, Beatrice, who's stuck in the chat as well, talking about, of course, the lack of funding, but also the communication between us and the access. I think access is so important. And so I guess to kind of follow up with that, because I think it's something that's come up a little bit in what each of you have said, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about, can you speak to that role of an intergenerational collaboration of this work, and what that's looked like, what kind of relationship you've needed, and the connection to elders, and recognizing the value of lived wisdom, and also valuing the youth and the less experienced, and merging that to seek collective liberation. Yeah, and what that's been like, guys, this work. Anybody want to kick us off? or I could
One of my
reframe.
questions is, has any of you, the ladies there, ever been to Africa? That's where we need to gather our energy and bring it back to the community, because that's where it all started for us, not here in America. America is a byproduct of what we had to suffer to get here. So that's my question. How are we relating our roots back to what we're doing and teaching it to our young people and to ourselves and families and communities?
Yeah, Beatrice, you are spot on. I personally have not been, but it is definitely on my journey card. I will be going soon, but I think you're right. I think it's a huge part of how we continue, or how we go deeper and bring this collective understanding of Blackness not being a monolith, and where our cultural understandings start. Because we do have an identity as a Black American, but like you said, where is our history and how did we get to where we are? And to understand that we have this ancient wisdom in us that comes from the motherland. I think that's an important part of the education that we have at Black Girls Green Futures, that we are hoping to get more specific about. What does the African diaspora look like, right? And how does it relate to the our Americanized self? I tend to lean into Dr. Kenjis Watson's work on trauma and telomeres, and he speaks of 4 tenets for Black wellness. One of them being that we must understand that we have ancient wisdom and how to unearth that ancient wisdom. Another one of his tenets that I lean into, specifically with working with kids of color, is that every child is a blessing. And when you are able to approach the work with youth in the world that they have to be raised in, that they have to grow in, understanding where they come from, understanding what they don't even know they come from, but teaching them to understand that they have that ancient wisdom in their DNA, just like the trauma carries in their DNA, is really important. The work that I try to do at BGGF and outside of that, environmentalism, is a big part of like changing the world, like Wawa said, but you can't change the world without changing behaviors. And you don't change behaviors until people have identities that are rooted in value systems. And by surfacing value systems that come from where we come from, I think is one step in the right direction. But also making sure that it is coupled with a way that kids who are growing up in the world that they're growing up in now can access that information. And so it could look fast, but start slow. I like to go slow to get there fast, if that makes sense, by, again, leaning into those tenets. And Beatrice, where you said that, how do we grow this? What do we do? I think what we're doing right now, and what we try to do at BGGF between girls and mentors, is create space just for conversation. Again, Blackness is not a monolith. How do you show up as a Black girl? How do you show up as a Black woman is authentic, right? How do you connect those things to how important it is to be connected to our environment, to care about our environment like we care about ourselves, to understand that as a woman, we are of the earth, we are earth, right? And that we birth things. And as Black women, we really have that interconnected understanding to the land. How do we dust that off of our young girls who are living in the societies they live in now? I think those conversations of where we come from are important. And I think they need to be dressed in how does it make sense for where you are right now?
Well, one of the things I want to say to you, and I'm getting back to one of our Black scholars, her name is Joy DeGruy. First, we got to get rid of this Black traumatic slave syndrome that has been following us for the last 500 to 600 years. That is the really problem. And getting that out of the way and connecting it with our roots and the earth. But I think we really have to clear that up. We're still dealing with Black traumatic post-slave syndrome in America, because
Mhm.
America has not healed from the atrocities that it has done. And who we have in office is not pulling us together as a nation, it's dividing us.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
before, all of you young ladies have all the education, all those degrees, all that so-called scientific westernized thinking, but let's go back to our roots and connect all of that and bring it to our young people, because we're suffering as Black people in this country. We're
Mhm.
still suffering.
Yeah.
So let's get down to the nitty gritty of where we need to go and what we have to do and bringing it all back. You got all the book learning, you got all the degrees. Now let's go back and bring our culture with us so that our young people can feel connected to the earth. You can't feel connected to the earth when your ancestors have been slaves for 500 to 600 years. We got to
Yeah.
get that out of the way and heal ourselves
Mhm.
and move forward with what we know as we have the education today.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, and a lot of that does have to do, I mean, we have the education and we have these things, but a lot of that also links back to this aspect of access and starting where we can and like starting, I think that's what a lot of the work that's being done that we're talking about is starting at like, and what we have access to the education, but like, do we have access to this mentality of like knowing where we come from, knowing our elders, knowing that we are the land, knowing that we are connected to the land. And so, yes, thank you for sharing, Beatrice. And alrighty, I see you, Rashida.
Can I say something?
Sure,
Yeah. Okay.
sure.
Thank you, Beatrice. It's the first time I've met you. My name is Rashida Hawk. I am also one of the co-designers of Black Girl Green Futures, and I want to comment or add to what you said as far as going back to the motherland and things like that. And I've lived and worked in Tanzania. We say Tanzania, but it's pronounced Tanzania for a while. And I would like to say that yeah, we do have a lot of trauma in our DNA that's transgenerational, transferred. And I'm sorry, I am one of these doctors. I was a doctor that loved science since I was a kid. So no one said, "Hey, you got to be this." It was just in my DNA. But fortunately, I was able to go to Tanzania and I lived in Ghana. And I would say one thing. One thing, teaching our young people about their culture, but also remembering that we have a unique culture as Black Americans that the whole world is watching. The whole world is watching. And so, just from our own hope and will to overcome slavery and all that came with it, consciously we had an epigenetic shift. So yeah, we have that trauma, but we have in our telomeres history of healing. And I don't like the word resilient, because remember one time a lot of public health people said, "Oh, resilient studies, not fair to study how people suffered." But I will also say that you know, holding on to a culture and our own culture that we created within this has helped us as well. So I totally agree with you. Collaborating with the continent is essential, and bringing our expertise and having them share their expertise. When you live on the continent of Africa, you have to realize that they've been colonized and they're still being colonized. So a lot of stuff they don't know that we Black Americans are bringing there and they're sharing with us. So I totally agree. I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rashida. I wanted to bring your voice that you were present, our other co-designer of Black Girls Green Futures. Thank you. Thank you for all that's been shared on this topic. It's so important for us to be doing our community work and dealing with the things that we can, because we can't control everything, but we can control how we tend to our community in that way. And in that breath, when we're thinking of our community, when we're thinking of like being here together in America, and also doing this work with other people of color, other non-people of color, who are doing this work with us. I'd like to ask to our panel, especially when we're thinking about uplifting Black leadership and the important work of allyship and partnership in this narrative. Um, what do you feel are the roles of allies and partners in this work, of making space, and partnering in making space for Black voices and decision-making spaces? And what can they do right now to make our movement a space that supports Black leadership thrive? Support Black leadership and thriving. And maybe we can start off with Jada, maybe.
Yes, sorry. I was hoping if you can repeat the first part of the question.
Yeah, of course. What are the roles of allies and partners in this work, in partnering and making space for Black voices and decision-making spaces? And in this narrative, all these things we've been talking about, what can they do right now to make our movement a space that supports Black leadership? Right.
Yeah, so I actually attended a lecture yesterday at Scripps that was about the difference between allyship and being an um, accomplice, which is a very interesting distinction. And I think something that I've experienced throughout my education is having people that are really passionate about bringing voices of color to the table, but lacking support once we're there. And so I feel that a really important part of being an ally is looking past the success of, helping us get to this place that we are currently at, but also being able to give up the space that you might be taking up for us to be able to take more of that space.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Wawa, Tashanda.
I feel like I've taken up so much space, but I definitely understand and appreciate being able to work with allies, right? I was with my part of co-designing and some of the things that we talked about as a team when we were initially starting the brainstorming over or the program, was like, what does that look like? At what point do we introduce allies? And for me, I think the real big importance of making sure that Blackness showed up in its entirety or as much as possible with the girls in the beginning was intentional, right? I wanted to be explicit about creating this space without apologies, right? I wanted to be unapologetic about calling it Black Girls, Green Futures, seeing other organizations that were being unapologetic, like Blacks in Marine Science and obviously Black Girl Environmentalists. Like, when you think of language and I believe the power behind words and naming it in titles, naming it in missions, making it value statements are important, especially for youth, because when you are unapologetic in the way that you use that language and all the power that it holds, it teaches kids that they can too. And so in the beginning, it was really important for us to showcase Blackness in its entirety with the mentors, with who is designing it, who's delivering and facilitating the engagements that we create for them. Because as we've all mentioned, it's really hard to find each other in this space. And it's only when we're able to collect like this and have large groups that we're like, holy crap, there are more of us. You're actually out there. You're doing this work too. And somehow we still live in these silos. Even though we're growing in this field, it's hard to find each other. And so in the beginning, it was really important, once again, that was highlighted. But then it's also really important to understand that, especially living in the United States, we are living and as a smaller population of the entire population. And it's important for young folks specifically that they understand there are allies out there and there are shared struggles and that they do underneath everything look the same. And then from there, it's really important for them to learn the skills of how do you navigate this work in spaces where you don't have allies, where folks don't look like you, they don't believe in what you believe in. How do you teach them the skills to have discourse with critical thinking, to have the knowledge, but also to have the lived experience to build mental models that support their ability to have these conversations, to outreach to their allies, and to stand up to those who don't align with their thinking? How do they skip over the gaps, fill the gaps, and do it confidently with their identity intact, with their culture behind them, and understanding that they are actually moving in the same steps that their ancestors created for them? And in the same breath, knowing that there are going to be others coming up behind them that they need to be able to provide and shine the light for.
Yeah, definitely taking up that power that I definitely think has been displayed in this class as well. So appreciating that energy. Wawa, did you have something to add as well?
Yeah, I think I love that part that Jada or that specification that you made, Jada, around the difference between accomplice and an ally. I think in this moment, I am really appreciating having accomplices who come are from all different races, all different means of positionality, whether in this case, I'm talking about partners that work with Black girl environmentalists from larger organizations to smaller organizations, because you'd be very surprised around, for example, Jada is, obviously such an incredible person who has decided to partner with Black Girl Environmentalist and take on one of her Hazel M. Johnson Fellows, who is named after one of, the matriarchs of the environmental justice movement. And, we have an incredible partner like you versus some of our initial partners who had to take a step back, even though they were larger organizations that had millions of dollars in their portfolio, who in this moment couldn't see themselves partnering with an organization called Black Girl Environmentalist. So again, in this moment, I think accomplice right now to me are folks that are, again, like in this moment, being very intentional with their language, being very intentional about how they're going to continue to step into the work that they have said that they have cared about in the past, even if it's not sexy or quote unquote acceptable in the present moment. And so in a way, I feel like I'm more aligned, or our organization is more aligned with partners who we really understand are folks who are partners, true partners that see the value in our work, see the value in the impact that we want to have, and see the value in our community first and foremost. So that's been awesome. And then also I just have like one quick comment to make about the conversation on Africa and things of that sort. I should have said earlier, I'm Kenyan American. So my family is from Kenya, and it was climate played a role in my family coming to the United States in the first place. And so it's interesting because for me, I really got into the environmental justice space because it was generational African American women who took me under their wing. So my connection to environmentalism inevitably led me back to my ancestral connection to earth stewardship in Kenya, but was really jump-started via my connection with African American older women who took me under their wings and taught me about their own experiences, ancestry. And that was a real experience of, yes, like back to what Rashida was talking about, there's so much that African people have to learn from generational African American people, and vice versa. And I think there's so much value in our shared experiences, especially when we think about land loss, and how that is something that my family has experienced in Kenya. But this is where our histories have been not shared, where there are a lot of commonalities in regards to exploitative relationships with the land, but also the land being this unique connector. And someone was talking about how we need to rediscover our, indigenous roots, and that is also something that I think is really important. And so I completely agree with Chastity, who put in the comments on there being a dream of there being some sort of, intergenerational program for women across the diaspora to connect and experience those things alongside each other, especially since a lot of what we're working on with Black Girl Environmentalist around the paradigm of Black women having lack of access to enter and thrive in the climate space. You could say the same thing happens, for example, in Kenya, where a lot like the conservation space was created by, colonizers, and in a lot of ways is still run not by, Black African people. And so I think that there's a lot of shared experience and shared intention around addressing those things across the diaspora. And that's also something that I get really excited about when I think about the possibilities of fortress conservation, the possibilities of what a just climate future looks like for Black women across the diaspora and the next generation.
Yes. And making those connections and even being able to have access to those lineage. I know myself, I've done a lot of work to go back as far as I can. And I think I found great power in that, even in the roadblocks, and the things that I can't have access. And knowing that ancestralship is not just physical, it's also that spiritual relationship and that connection to each other, ancestors that came before, and also the land and the earth. So yes. And I think we've talked a lot about like that trauma and the hindrances that kind of get in the way, um, especially in doing work in this country, and facing all that we're facing with the climate crisis and industrialization. What I guess, and I'm looking at the time, but what is what does that experience look like as a woman, shaping the work that you're doing? And how, like, what is keeping your work pushing forward for justice, um, as we hope for this greener, more ancestrally connected, space for us? Yeah, and this is more of a question for everyone. So,
I can just say really simply, the thing that always continues to push me forward is hope. I hang on to hope. I have hope for our future. I have hope for our people. I have hope for myself. I have hope for the babies that I get to engage with every day. And I'm lucky to be in a field where I can see them come back as adults and see how this fundamental engagement and work, when it's again intentional and you take the time and you work on learning and continue to learn for yourself, and for your community, how it's impactful. I have seen how this work shifts narratives for people and communities. I've seen how this work shifts the future, understanding for a youth and also their journey. And so that's what keeps me going, the hope of it all.
Jada, or what? Anything to add?
I think for me, what keeps my intention moving forward, regardless of all of the obstacles, and especially in the past few months that we've had to face, I think that it is having a vision for the future, I think has been really inspiring for me. I not the first one to say this. I can't remember who made like the first like large quote about it, but if you can see something, then you are able to take actionable steps towards making it come true. And so for me, having a vision for the future and what it can be like and who's a part of it, and who's in power, and the fact that the community is the power, I think that is really what pushes me forward, is hope for seeing that in the near future. And I think that because there is so much disruption right now, that this might be a really special time to make great moves forward towards that vision.
Definitely. Vision part is
Um,
super important.
so the question is specifically how we envision the future for
Yeah, how you're envisioning and like what keeps you in this work, what keeps you pushing for justice, and as we in that vision as well.
yeah, so this kind of lends itself a bit to the previous answer of shouting out Black American, African American women in particular as a group that because of the unique experiences that they've had in this country have left behind so much wisdom on how to navigate moments like this. For me, I consider my mentors to be both living with us and folks who have passed on, folks I've met, folks I haven't. And so I've been really leaning on the concept of earth seed, which is like a concept from Octavia Butler. And it's this idea that God is change and the constant in life is change. And, I was reading some of her work earlier on in the year, as many of us were, given the fires in Pasadena, et cetera. And I remember coming across Earthseed again, and it made me really upset because a whole part of, Earthseed is that with change means that whenever there are wins, it is inevitable that wins will be lost, and then that lost wins will be regained again. And that it's just like a process and truth of our planetary experience. And I think we're experiencing a lot of movement losses in a literal sense. But as Jada was talking about, these are also moments of renaissance as well, right? These are moments of times where people become even more radical in articulating exactly what it is that we require and demand in a better world. And I think in moments like this in previous history, reading a lot of like Black American authors and writers and thought leaders from the 1930s, I think that what they're talking about is directly applicable to this moment, especially for young people like myself that can sometimes not really understand how like there is a generational aptitude that we have, and that there is this tradition of particularly young people in the midst of moments like this stepping up and demanding a better world and doing the things necessary to actualize that. And so, yeah, rediscovering voices of our past and embracing, the idea of Sankofa to go forward, we have to go back, has been really helpful for me in this moment. It's something that we talk a lot about as a team at Black Girl Environmentalist.
Yes, emphasis on that. In order to move forward, we do have to go back, and um, it's so hard to figure out. It's so different um, across because we are not a monolith. Everybody is starting from a different place, but appreciating all the spaces that this group and anyone on this call doing this work and this live work in order to bridge the gap and um, help us find the space to create, to connect with the land, to connect with each other in that way. I know, I feel like maybe there's a couple of questions we didn't quite have space for. We're kind of running on our time, but we can round back in our follow-up. See a couple like more logistical questions, so we'll definitely address them in our follow-up. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who put a question in the chat, who's been engaged in this conversation, who's brought their power to this space. And thank you, Wawa and Jada and Tashanda, for being with us today and so graciously sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us and like what you're doing to connect the dots and to bridge the gap. And while we're coming to a close to today's call, we want to be sure that you know that this is not a stopping point and it's the beginning. And there are so many different actions that we can take with us and with yourself as well um, to weave deeper and staying plugged into this alliance as we move forward. And so our World Weaver events, they're really meant to share and build bridges of understanding an action between the leaders and communities that's happening on the ground to change our environmental landscape, and all of you who support our work. And so we encourage you to um, follow up and like look up all the wonderful things that are happening in this network with Wawa and Black Girl Environmentalist, with Tashanda and her work with Seas of Carbon, and Leah with Black Girls Green Future, and also Jada and her work with Daybreak as well. And I will add, of course, always funding, donate, donate, donate to support the work that we're doing to co-design vital programming like BGGF and alongside Tashanda and Jada, and create spaces for events like this. And so with that, thank you so much for being here, and to our speakers, and appreciate your collaboration. And yeah, we'll see you at the next event.